Hi, welcome. This is Dr. John DeMartini. This is one of the most amazing and inspiring shows that you can listen into. If you want to be on the edge of your seats, if you want to open up your heart, if you want to expand your mind, and you want to meet incredible people, stay tuned because you're just about to experience a transformative radio show that will change your life. And you're listening to the Dr. Pat Show that's coming up right next.
Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. Talk radio to thrive by. Powerful, inspiring, and coming to you live, bringing you stories of people like you and me, busting through and living life full out. Get ready to dare to wonder what your life would be like if you knew you could not fail.
Wow. Hey, everybody. I am Dr. Pat, and I am co-hosting this fabulous show today. As you know, this is our second show with Dr. Connie Stomper. And one of the things that I love is I get to work with people in advance. For those of you, just take a sneak peek at Dr. Connie and what she is all about. Beyond education, master's degree, she and I actually went from the same school. I didn't even know that. Ordained minister and so much more. Her passion and commitment is to really flood the world with individual and community and global peace. You know, this is the notion of, and the frequency and the vibration of loving that which is. And that which is the context of the planet, everything on it, the people on it, and who we could possibly become. And so when you think about the work she's done globally, how she's worked for world peace and the Community Planet Foundation and so much more, you'll understand what today's show is about. Beyond all of that, there's something that happens to some of us that overcome some physical challenges in life. But one of the things you may want to know is how to live life as if it's rigged in your favor. Dr. Connie, right? Don't that.
Oh, I love that quote by Rumi because I think it's kind of a pattern interruption. When we think rigged, we think against us, right? Unless you're the one doing the rigging, which I don't think our audience is, hopefully. But so I think that phrase really just turns things around because on this level, yes, mind, emotions, physical, the game we're playing down here, yeah, there are things that don't necessarily work in our favor. But that's where the higher perspective comes in, because how do we see life as rigged as in our favor? We go to a higher level, which is that we're not just having a physical experience here, we're a soul having that physical experience. And why are we doing that? We're doing that to learn to grow, to expand, to basically, to me, the spiritual Olympics, to know ourselves as that divine essence in greater and greater ways, to live from that place of loving and peace and enthusiasm and creativity and patience and compassion and all of those different qualities. And so everything, you know, my experience and belief and what I work with clients is that everything that we experience, if we choose, can be seen as a situation that's been designed for us to move more into those qualities of soul. Now, one way we do that is when there's wonderful things happening, you know, we have a lovely new child, or we have a great relationship, or a great job, or a success, and we can learn to appreciate those more and more. Those things are for us. But what about those things that don't seem like they're for us, really? You know, how are they rigged in our favor? Well, they're rigged in our favor. If we're playing a spiritual Olympics, we have an opportunity to exercise spiritual muscles. I'll give you just a really interesting quick example. I was just doing customer service in a chat online and, you know, go through the whole bot thing, which does nothing, and get to a person. And then they finally say, oh, yeah, I understand. I'm going to do something. And all of a sudden another person comes on. Anyway, long story short, this happened about 5 times. And, you know, part of me is getting like wanting to get irritated. The other person, this is quite humorous. This is actually a chance also to be patient or to be creative and say, okay, what else do I do? Or to look at how am I expending my life energy? Is this really worth the energy that I'm putting into this? Or can I actually just let it go because it's really not that important? There's all kinds of options when we start seeing, you know, from a different viewpoint. What if this was rigged in my favor? On what level and in what way can I use it that way?
Yeah. I love that you're talking about this because there's a flip side of this I'd like you to talk about. You know, let's take another scenario. This morning, 6:30 in the morning, my phone starts to ring and, you know, I get a call or text, and then Linda gets a call. You know, your system is down, your database is down. I can't get in the database. And, you know, those kinds of words, when you call in for us, we hit the 911 button, right?
Right.
But we didn't check. We didn't think, because you go into this automatic. And so sometimes you have to stop for a minute. You really have to stop and say, what's real here? You know, what is it? And so, long story short, you find out it's not our system. It's happening on the other end for somebody. And
Right.
Comcast was down today for everybody. I have multiple internet providers, so I know that.
Right.
But what if that happened for a very particular reason for this person? What if the reason had nothing to do with anything you and I are talking about? What if the higher perspective was, pause, what are you really trying to say on your next show?
Mm-hmm.
What do you really want to say on your next show? And I want to ask you about that, because there are times things like that show up.
Right.
And we want to go to the gloom and doom. The grim reaper of technology has appeared. But what if it wasn't, Dr. Connie?
What if it wasn't? Well, I mean, like you said, a pause. I mean, are you asking from the point of view of the person that experienced it on their side? Like, how did they? Well, again, it's like, I mean, I had that happen once before a big interview, and it was like, you know, what are the creative ways I deal? I think the check it out is a great thing because we can assume against ourselves. You know, it's like I know a person that lost business the last time her internet went down, and one of her what if she got out of it was I need to have a hotspot because my business depends. I mean, it can be on the physical level, right? It can be an opportunity to just, you know, stop and breathe and be in that patience for a minute
Yep.
so that we can think straight. Because if we go into panic mode, that often doesn't happen. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of ways. I don't know what the person's situation is, but you know, you've dealt with it. I've dealt with it. And the other thing, like I said, is how much life energy is it? What's in the
Exactly.
scope of things? How important is this really? I had to, one of the other ways I really used this principle was that I had health issues for about 6 years that had a lot to do with being in pain most of the time and not having energy to do a lot of things. And boy, it was the most exquisitely designed curriculum. It was not a bad creation. And one of the things I had to ask myself often is, you know, how much energy I'm expending on something. What's the worst that can happen? What do I want to happen? And what if it didn't happen? Do you know what I mean? What, in the broader sense of this, is it really making everything
Yeah.
work on this level, or is it going to that higher level to see what the opportunity is? I saw patterns where I realized the stress I was putting myself under was because I was trying to like justify my existence. You know, how much am I doing? How much am I accomplishing? Have I done this right? There's that perfectionism that comes in. And I'll tell you, one of the things that was really interesting that I became aware of, and again, this was a long journey, and I didn't know I was going to get well. On the physical level, I learned everything I could about what I was dealing with because 10 doctors didn't know. And I finally found a sort of paradigm shift in medicine that did allow me to heal. On the emotional level, I learned a lot of self-forgiveness and nurturing. On the mental level, I started noticing these patterns of how I was creating more stress than I really needed to. But on the spiritual level, I realized that from the soul level, you know, most of the time, if we want to feel abundance, we think that has to do with a good job and a lot of money. If we think we want love, we need a relationship, we need, children, we need good friends, all of this kind of stuff. If we want to feel worthiness, we need to accomplish something in our. But on the soul level, I believe in my experiences, we already are all of those qualities.
Wow.
So the test there for me was huge. It was like, this is going to a whole new level. How do I live in a place of abundance, health, love, enthusiasm, when I don't have any of the props in the world to support that?
Yeah.
How do I just go to that experience directly and learn to live from that place, not dependent on what's happening
I
outside?
love that. I love that you asked the how question and not the why question.
Mhm.
Let's talk about how else life, I love this, rigged in our favor. That
Right,
is that Rumi had it going on. But there are other ways in life, right?
right.
That life is rigged in our favor from a higher perspective, but we can't see it. What are some of the other ways?
Well, some of the other ways, and I did want to say something about just how people also expect things to be not rigged in their favor. And I just
Oh my gosh, yeah.
that for a minute because I know you know that I'm an astrologer, and one of at one point I was looking at these cards that were designed for the different signs, and I'm a Pisces, and I looked at the Pisces one, and they said a Pisces will walk 100 miles to get their feelings hurt. And I went, I have done that. I know how to do that. And then I realized that's a really well honed skill. All I have to do is be intellectually honest and look at it from another point of view. How can I use that skill to see how everything is for me? And it's funny because when I do workshops and I use that example, and I'll start by saying how many people are Pisces, and maybe a few people will raise their hands. And then I give that little scenario and I say, now how many people are Pisces? And I can't tell you that most of the group will say, yes, that is something that I do. I expect the worst. Another way that how is it rigged in our favor? I think a really important way is that the concern with death and dying in this culture, and I'm not saying, I think some other cultures have a little bit more openness, but we kind of look at things as this is the end, this is all I get. There's nothing after this. And loved ones are going to die. We're going to, and as a psychologist, I know that even makes people more fearful of any kind of endings. Do you know what I mean? Because there's that resonance of this is going to be, well, from a higher perspective, the soul came from spirit and the soul is here and the soul is going back to spirit. And not only that, but I believe that the more that we learn to live, that if the game here is learning to live in that place of those qualities of soul and using every experience to exercise those muscles, like, what muscle am I expected to use here? Is it joy? Is it patience? Is it compassion for someone? Is it just loving of myself? I'm exercising because the more I live in that place, the easier it gets to be in that place no matter what's going on. And the more I'm in that place, the more I can use those qualities, in terms of the experience I have inside of myself, not dependent on what else life brings me. I had a privileged experience of having both a shared death experience with my mother and what would be called a near death experience. And I say privileged because those things, I think, if you've ever read about them or talked to somebody that's had them, there's no doubt that there is another level of existence and that what we are in the physical is not everything that we are. And this life is not the only level that happens on. Now, not everybody knows the term shared death experience. And I'm going to go back a little bit to just explain. There's a backstory with my mom because her dad died when he was very disabled from a stroke. And then a little bit after that, he appeared to her young and vibrant and happy and telling her how okay he was. Very different than the way the body looked when he ended up transitioning. And anybody that's had that kind of experience, I mean, she was like, this was not a dream. This is a different reality. This is something that is on a whole different level. So she got very curious about the afterlife. And she was reading books about, near-death experiences and different kinds of things people share about that. There's videos online all over the place. And she said to me, what do you think it's like when we go to the other side? And I had at that point been in a spiritual focus and meditating for about 25, 30 years. So I shared with her some things about the kind of peace and bliss, peace beyond over understanding, levels of bliss and joy that are just not even present on this level in the same way. And she said to me one day, she said, well, if I go the other side, should I come and tell you what it's like? And she said, I promise I won't scare you. Well, that's very considerate, Mom. Thank you very much. So I looked at her in the eye and I said, Mom, I think that you should. You know why? And she said, no, why? I said, because I want to tell you, I told you so. And she just laughed because of, because it's like, yes, I've had experiences that are very much like what is on the other side. And I'll tell you, the near-death experience, without the important things about it are not the details. It did not occur for me at a time in life that it does for many people when they don't have an awareness of other levels and what's on the other side. It's kind of meant to be an awakening. And all of a sudden, rather than being confined by the physical, they have this enormous experience of what lies beyond in the universe. And, what spiritual personages and teachers and relatives and whatever else they may encounter there, what sense of oneness and unity that the whole design is about. In my case, I had been already studying and working and experiencing those things. So I'll tell you the really important, impactful part of my experience was, first of all, we don't need a shared death or a near-death experience to know that we are an eternal soul and essence. Let me tell you, because that was not, that's not what I needed. That had been something very similar to where my spiritual work had taken me. That when we go inside and we contact that part that is eternal, we get an experience of that and of other levels. For me, the other important thing was that I had actually a choice to come back. And in my case, it was what they said was, we need more light bearers on the planet. This is what's going to be happening. Are you willing to go down and keep holding that vibration?
Wow.
And I think that's important because often people think of death as like it was their time. Well, I mean, ultimately, it is the time they left, but often people do have more than one window.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we want to value life and use it. The more experience and the more time here, the more we can evolve into that awareness of who we are as a divine being, the more, the higher we can go when we leave this level.
Yeah.
So we don't want to do it prematurely, is what I'm saying.
No, and part of this leads to what does it mean to embrace a higher perspective? Because there are many of us that didn't even hear the term share. We didn't even hear the SDE term. And recently there have been a number of really good books out about them. And then we read about it and we say, wow, that's actually what happened to me when I got rushed to the hospital that day.
Right.
That's why I couldn't hear them, but I'm in the ambulance and I can. But so we've learned more about these things. It's so fascinating. Let's talk about this, how to embrace a higher perspective. I grew up with several of my aunts, but one of my favorite was my Aunt Grace.
Okay.
Interesting name, right?
Name.
Right?
You always had grace in your life, in other words, Pat. Huh?
Exactly. And she was so, I don't know how to explain it, but I want you to do this. She didn't say higher perspective, but she reeked of it.
Mm-hmm.
She everything she did, living this life. I can see myself in the afterlife. I could see myself surrounded. She would talk about this. Just like we would talk about what you want for breakfast. She'd be like, oh, I'm lighting a candle right here. Oh, well, who died? No, this is for me. This is so this, I think, is a sense of higher perspective. But how do we do that? How do we embrace our higher perspective in the context of live life as if it's been rigged in your favor?
Well, I think the way to see it as rigged in our favor is to be more in touch with that part that knows that who we are and what we're doing here. So I think I mentioned last discussion, one of it is, the fact that I've meditated and got some of those higher experiences was just spending time with that part. There's so much of us that goes out to what's happening and how do we handle this and what's going to happen here. And, it's like, how, when do we spend time with the part that's inside of us, that soul part of us that is there, that quiet part? Another way that I've learned to do that is asking that higher part. One time I was going to want to I was working really hard and I wanted to go see a movie and, and it's like, the physical level is playing real close and I'm going to do that. And emotionally, because I need a break. I've been working really hard. And the mental thing said, yeah, people said there's it's really good reviews. And the other part said, don't go. I'm like, what do you mean don't go? It's like, I deserve this. Well, I went and what happened? The movie wasn't actually playing there. So some part knew better than the mind and emotions and the ego kind of thing. So sometimes asking for that direction, but then like in your example of the person where the whole situation with the network went down, it's like, check it out. Check it out, because we don't learn what part is talking. Is it my dumb part or is it my wise part unless I check out what's going on. And I've done things where I've gotten into intuitions and I just took all kinds of risks to find out who was that was talking. So asking and looking for, listening carefully for that higher part. And, doesn't mean we don't have parts that don't know. So learning to distinguish that voice. I think another prime way is to practice loving, to practice those soul qualities. And loving often people think means whatever's happening or that person deserves it. I appreciate, I think they're great. It's wonderful. I see loving as getting in touch with that part of ourselves inwardly that is loving. And I was studying the Aramaic words of Jesus. And I love that because it's a whole different energy and just seems, much more mystical translations. But they had a concept I came across, which was called unripe, that evil was actually unripe, not in fruition, not blossomed. And when I think of it that way, if I see something I would consider evil, then my loving actually has an energy that, and I direct it there, can help to mature that it actually can make a difference, that it's not about, that people don't have the inherent potential to live in their goodness or live from their soul. But my judgment, my hitting against them, my having that contracted energy is not going to facilitate that. And if we look at that on a global scale, like you started out in this episode, what if everybody was taking responsibility for their own loving because they want to live in that place?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, my anger might feel good for a while and my judgment, but ultimately, is that the place I want to live in?
Yeah. That's actually not living as if life was rigged in your favor either.
It's not.
Right? I mean, that's living like life is rigged to really mess me up.
And I'm going to
level.
I'm going to collude in that.
Yeah, I'm going to be partnered with the Grim Reaper here for my life. And I love the way you describe that. I love that you're looking at the Aramaic because it's so amazing, isn't it? I remember the first time I heard the Lord's Prayer in the natural language, the original language, and it just made me cry.
Well, you can hear it online too, and something about that vibration is very the Greek and Roman mind, that some of the other translations, it's a different consciousness. And this was one example. There wasn't even a difference between inner and outer in Aramaic. Think about that.
Wow.
Talking about in terms of who we are, and that we're living that inner place. I came across another quote that I really like from Deepak Chopra along these lines, and he says, love grows when you trust the universe is on your side.
Yeah.
Love.
And it does though, doesn't it? Because my mom, people always ask me, how did I become such an optimist? And all I could think is my birth mom, was so extraordinarily happy and yet at the same time extraordinarily depressed. The happy side of her was so filled with joy and loved. Everybody loved her.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean when everybody loves you? That means you must be giving something out. That means you must be putting something out. And I think that's what you and I are talking about here. if you live life as if it's rigged in your favor, then somewhere in there you're living life as if life is rigged in everybody's favor. You're really seeing that, right?
It's all that, it's part of that oneness. It's that the life is the thing that's rigged positively, not just for you, not anybody special, not greater than. It's really here for all of us to learn to go to a higher, more joyful, loving place. And when you're talking about that giving out, I think that's another key for me that is really a way of getting in touch with that higher part that, is basically rigging this for us. And I'm saying that because I think looking at ourselves as souls also gives us more agency in life. We're not victims, as a soul, we've kind of designed and consented to the things that are happening to us so that we can learn those lessons to go to that higher place. So I'm no longer a victim. This is not like, oh, this is happening to me, or this is what's happening. And that other aspect to me is the idea of service. That idea that we have that abundance and we have, the overflow. And as I'm giving, I'm acknowledging not only the value of these other people, but the fact that I am this abundant being that has this overflow of love and joy to give people. And as I practice it, to me, that's another spiritual muscle, that giving. In this culture, it's all about accumulating, building up, having, there's almost a greed culture. And it's like the really wealthy person is the one that has enough to give. And I've practiced that, like even when, let's say, it's like my cash flow was short, I take people to dinner because I want to be in that consciousness of I have abundance. In fact, there's an affirmation I love that was like, the more generous I am, the more money I generate. Generous is being one that can generate. And I love that framing of it. So I think looking, and service can be a whole project.
Yeah.
Going to, the hospitals, it could be going and feeding the hungry, but it can be just an attitude. If I'm in the supermarket and I'm in a consciousness of service, I can use my joy and my connection with people to make them, say something that they laugh or acknowledge. The other day, there was a young guy with lots of enthusiasm. I said, I just love your enthusiasm. I love how you do that. He's just a checkout clerk.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, thank you. It's that attitude of I can brighten somebody's day, I can lift somebody, and I can lift myself in the process of doing that. Because
there's nothing more powerful than service and volunteer work to lift that. Dr. Connie, thank you so much. Please, before we wrap up here, what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Soulmusings.org, soulmusings.org. I think it's on the notes for the show. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have questions or comments, you can contact me at the show, but also on the website, there's a place, and let me know what you think.
I want you to let Dr. Connie also know, how are you living your life as if it was rigged in your favor? And if you're sitting there thinking it ain't, I want you to challenge yourself to do something that would support that. Just think about it. Just one thing. One thing, right? One thing. Thank you, Dr. Connie. Thank you all for tuning us in, turning us on. We'll see you next time.